Welcome into the Prep Extra podcast. I'm Colton Stone alongside, as always, Chris Basnett. Another week of football.
2 weeks in a row on the podcast.
That's right.
That's pretty good for us.
This is a good streak for us.
Yeah.
Had some blowout games last week.
Yeah.
And some, we're kind of in a mild week of games this week. But, speaking of streaks, big thing is Lincoln East, and maybe one of the biggest games in the state, definitely in the city. They get to host Millard South on Thursday. Winners of 4 straight. Obviously, Millard South is undefeated and blew another team out this time. North Star on the wrong end of that. But East has gotten progressively better each week, and now they really get their first test of or first statement that they could make to either maybe sneak up and pull off an upset or at least look competitive against the second best team in the state.
Yeah. I think we all knew East was going to be pretty good. John Gingery, coach, felt pretty good about this team, and when you've been doing it as long as he has, you kind of know what you have. You have a pretty good feeling, and they go out and they lose that first game to Kearney on the road at UNK. That's a tough place to go play, and there's a lot of teams that'll tell you that. And it was 2-touchdown game, and it turns out Kearney's pretty good. They haven't lost a game yet either. So yeah. But since then, you're right. They've gotten a little better every week. They played Southeast week 2 and had to go to double overtime and won that game. And I think that kind of kickstarted them a little bit. And they've been really, really good these last 3 weeks. They beat Columbus 41-14 last Friday. And Columbus isn't a pushover. That's a game Lincoln East was probably favored in, but it wasn't going to be easy. And Lincoln East made it look pretty easy for the most part. But yeah, now you're right. Millard South, whole different animal. Kind of one of the surprises of Class A football this year, a sophomore quarterback in Jet Tamala who's thrown for 1,200 yards in 5 games. That offense is just unbelievable. And we saw it last week. Lincoln North Star goes on the road. An improved Lincoln North Star team goes on the road, returns the opening kickoff for a touchdown, and that was pretty much it for the Gators. It was, I believe, 51-7 at halftime. And it just happens so fast with Millard South. They're a team that could just bury you really quick. And so I think that's what East has to watch out for. That defense has been really, really solid the past 3 weeks or so. Can they find a way to just give the offense a chance? This offense is going to want to run the ball with Jeter Wordley and Dash Bauman, mix in some shots there if they can. But if they're able to control the ball, if they're able to hang on to the ball, not even necessarily score, and obviously they're going to have to score to win the game, but if you get this thing to halftime where it's 14-7 or something like that, or into the third quarter where it's 14-7, now you're start going, okay, maybe we can grind this out. But I think that's what it's got to be for Lincoln East. They're not going to win a beauty contest against Millard South. I just don't think there's not many teams outside of West Side that can probably stay with Millard South this year from an athletic standpoint. So can Lincoln East kind of muck it up a little bit, run the ball, control the clock, give themselves a chance? And if they do, boy, that's a huge statement, not only for Lincoln East, but for the city of Lincoln. We've seen kind of some of the results when the Lincoln teams have gone outside the city, and it hasn't been real pretty at times. So big chance for the Spartans Thursday night, a little Thursday night football this week over at Seacrest. That should be a really interesting game.
Yeah, you look at those two top teams in West Side and Millard South. Obviously, they're kind of the only two that will boat race you, and they're the only two teams you really are just, like you said, you almost, if you're Lincoln East, if you can eat clock and maybe not score, at least you did one of those two things. You have to do one of those two things every time you have the ball. You either have to score to keep up pace, or you just can't give them the ball.
Yeah, I think there's a formula. If you go back to last year, when North Platte beat Omaha West Side, and West Side had to get on the bus and travel out to North Platte, and North Platte got a couple turnovers early, turn those into touchdowns, and they run that wing-bone offense. So that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to limit possession, shorten the game, and Westside gave them a couple gifts with turnovers that they were able to convert. Can Lincoln East grab a couple turnovers? That's the thing. If we talk about eating clock but not scoring, but if you get an interception at the Millard South 30-yard line, can you turn that into 6? Can you turn it into 3?
Right.
Can you get in front? I think is what we're trying to say here. And whether that's 3 points, 7 points, 10 points, whatever it is, give yourselves a chance to get in front. See if your defense can make a play. Right. maybe rattle a young quarterback a little bit that hasn't had a lot of trouble so far, hasn't had to see a lot of pressure, adversity. And you have the defense to do that with a lot of playmakers. Dash Bauman going to Wyoming, play linebacker. You start with there, and there's high level athletes on that defense for Lincoln East. So I think the capability is there for the Spartans. Doing it is another thing, but there's a tried and true formula there. If you can get a couple turnovers early, turn those into points, make Millard South work, that's going to give you the best shot.
Yeah, put yourself in control. That's essentially the name of the game. Easier said than done.
Yeah.
Staying in the city, another, not a trying to sneak up for an upset type game, but another game that may kind of set the tide for the rest of the season. You've got Southeast and Southwest playing each other. This is kind of could be a turning point for either one. It could, maybe propel one of them into, maybe squarely being in a playoff position, and it could put the other one in a spot where they've got to go on a big run.
Yeah, it's a huge game for both teams, and Southeast had a tough one last week. Millard North beat them 49-28. Millard North's first win of the year. That's been a pretty disappointing Millard North team, I think a lot of people would say, but they had athletes where he talked about they have the double overtime loss to Lincoln East, and it's been a deal where they've been close a couple times and haven't been able to close the deal. And now you're sitting there at 2-3, and here comes your rival, and here comes like Millard West down the road in a couple weeks. You're looking at a stretch of this schedule where it's kind of make or break time if you're Southeast. And so it's a huge game from that standpoint for the Knights. If you're Southwest, at 2-3, it's kind of the same thing. You had a couple games where you had the lead in the fourth quarter and couldn't hang on, and instead of 2-3, maybe you're 4-1 right now with a freshman start. I'm about to call him a true freshman, just a freshman starting a quarterback and some young receivers, some young skill guys, and you're maybe ahead of schedule. But still, you're 2-3. You got your rival Friday. You win that game. You set yourself up to get those young guys into an experience where they've got to make a push for a playoff spot, like you said. So, really, really, really interesting game from that standpoint on both sides. That's the 8:00 kick at Seacrest Friday night. The Seacrest doubleheader returns this week. Lincoln High and Lincoln North Star in the early game, 4:30. But yeah, that's going to be a fun atmosphere. 8 p.m. kick, rival schools. I think back to the basketball game they played last year at Southwest, where it was a packed gym, and went down to the wire. Pretty wild game. Do we get another one of those this week where it's a shootout and it's kind of a wild game, considering what both teams are playing for?
Right. Yeah, definitely. Some interesting games throughout the city. Those, but the two we mentioned, obviously the biggest two. Looking at Class B, pretty much on schedule, status quo.
Yeah.
No real surprises. I am a little surprised, not super surprised, but Waverly shutting out York. That's a game where it's going to be a rock fight essentially. But for York to give up 28 points, but also Waverly on the other side to give up no points, is very impressive for a Waverly team that we've seen them do this the past couple of years, where they get really hot and then it's almost like you're kind of waiting. Where's the speed bump in the schedule going to be?
Yeah, it's I watched Waverly against Norris 2 weeks ago, and Norris pushed Waverly into the fourth quarter. And if you'd have told me that game against York would have been a shutout, I would have said, yeah, I'm at 10-0, 7-0, 3-0, maybe, but 28-0. Just really, really impressive with Waverly. We know they've got some explosiveness on offense, but you talk about that York defense. They only gave up 17 to Bennington. It's not like they've given up a ton of points to anybody. They gave up 10 points to Scotts Bluff, who's always really good offensively out, and that was on a road trip out to the Panhandle. So for Waverly to go into York, into a tough environment, win that game 28-0, control it from start to finish, basically, really, really impressive. I think you can tell they took a lot out of that Norris game as far as what to clean up, where they needed to improve and things like that. And that's the sign of a well-coached team. And Reed Madstead, certainly one of the best coaches in the area. There's no doubt about that, just based on the results. So, yeah, you look at that game as maybe one, well, maybe that's where Waverly stumbles a little bit. But boy, the way they won that game, the way they played that game, that maybe gives you a little bit different outlook on the season. And you look at the top 3-4 teams in Class B. It's Bennington, it's Elkhorn North, it's Omaha Skutt, who have all been very impressive. But I think you can put Waverly in that group now as a team that, if you're talking about a state champion, it's probably coming from those 4 teams. So for Waverly to be in that group, now you just keep building on what you've done, and that was certainly impressive last week.
Yeah, and what is what are some of the struggles they could have going out to the Panhandle this week with Scotts Bluff? That's obviously a game that, I don't think a lot of teams look forward to. It's a long trip. Scotts Bluff is always right there. They're always a pretty good team, like you mentioned. It's not an easy thing to go out there and then still play your A game.
Yeah, and Scotts Bluff came out here last year, came to Waverly and took that game deep into the fourth quarter. That's a good program, and they've got one of the best players in the state. And Sebastian Boyle, running back, probably going to set the Class B record for career rushing yards. Was almost a 2,000-yard guy last year. He might get there this year. They're going to be big and physical and tough up front. It could look a lot like that York game, I think, where it's two teams just kind of bashing each other over the head. And we'll see who's standing at the end. Scotts Bluff stoinked an extra point last week against Northwest, or they're 4-1 right now. And they lose a 4-point game to York. So it's not like they're losing to bad teams and getting blown out. This is still a really good team. And like you said, it's a really tough road trip. And so Waverly riding high right now. How do they kind of regroup, get ready for that long bus ride, and then get off it and get ready to play a really good team? That's going to be an important test for them.
Yeah, it'll be interesting there. Looking at the 2C classes, last week we had the Wahoo doubleheader. No Journal Star curse on that. Both Wahoo teams won. You had a chance to see Bishop Neumann, correct? What was impressive about Bishop Neumann and kind of what they've put together this season?
Connor Booth, the Husker football and baseball recruit, and he's the real deal. He's got legit. I think for a lot of people that watch the schools in the city, whether it's the Class A schools or Pius or somebody else, you say C2, who's he playing, those sorts of things, but he's legit. You're talking about a 6'2", 200-pound running back, and that'll play at any level, and it really plays at C2 and UTAN. They took a lead into halftime of that game. It rained most of the game. The field got muddy and slick. Bishop Neumann could barely execute a snap, much less hand the ball off, and much less, get a cut to get upfield. So they basically went into halftime, and Coach Jerome Roberts said that we basically drew it up in the dirt. It was a formation where it was line, two wings, and Connor Booth behind center. And they just snapped it to him. And I think they ran something like 26, 27 plays in the second half. And I think 23 of them were direct snaps to Connor Booth. And they said, here it is. He's going to run left or he's going to run right, and you got to stop it. And they couldn't. He runs for 2 touchdowns in the second half, almost 150, 160 yards in the second half, had a long touchdown run called back, and kind of willed his team back into it. And so, that's a kid that, and he's only a junior. That's the thing I think we kind of forget about that. He's committed to Nebraska already, has a reputation had a great sophomore year running the ball, has a reputation as a great baseball player. We get to enjoy him for the rest of this year and all of next year. And I think that's something. He's one of those special athletes at that C2 level, that C1, C2 level, that you might only get 1 or 2 of those guys a year, and so really special athlete. I encourage you, if you get a chance to go watch Bishop Neumann, go check him out. Connor Booth's a really good player and just a leader for that team, and a guy that clearly they don't mind giving the ball 25, 30 times a game and saying, here you go, try and stop it.
Yeah, and then up in C1, Wahoo stays undefeated. Pretty big win over Lakeview. But C1, we've said it. We can probably say it till we're blue in the face. It's kind of those top 3 teams, 4 teams maybe, and similar to, A we think is pretty much down to 2. B is down to a kind of a grouping of 4. C1's kind of in that same spot where there's maybe 4 teams, and it's like, okay, if the state champion's not in this grouping, then something happened in the quarter semi somewhere along the way.
Yeah, and Wahoo's definitely in that group, 5-0. They've been really impressive. Another kind of defensive-minded team. They have a win over Pierce already, defending state champs. They have a win over Ashland Greenwood, ranked 3rd in the state right now. You're talking about teams that have been there, won state titles, been in state finals that Wahoo has beaten. And look, Wahoo's been there too. They won a state title not very long ago either. Let's not forget that. And you talk about kind of those top 3, 4 teams. There's Aurora and Pierce kind of lurking. Number 5 and number 6 kind of quietly just going about their business. It's not the same as it was last year when they kind of ran away from everybody. You've got some different blood this year. Boone Central number 1, Wahoo number 2, Ashland Greenwood number 3, Adams Central 5-0 number 4. little bit of a mystery there. Not a high scoring team, but a really good defensive team. So yeah, you have to put Wahoo in that group of favorites right now. You have to, and the same with Bishop Neumann in C2. So you think of Wahoo and you think basketball. A lot of the times, and this year it's football. You're talking about two teams, both the Warriors and the Cavaliers, that have a chance to make really deep playoff runs, really make it a fun fall in Wahoo.
Yeah, another game we'll have our eyes on as far as the city goes. Parkview Christian taking on Pawnee City, rematch of the six-man state title last season. Parkview, of course, again, similar to last year, has the one loss to SEM, and now it's a question of can they run the table? We've said it kind of each time we've talked about them. Now that they've set an expectation, can they meet it? No bigger, battle than facing a team you just beat for a state championship.
Yeah, and going on the road to do it, hop on the bus and driving 90 minutes down to Pawnee City to play that game against a team, like you said, that would like to reverse that result. Parkview beat Pawnee City twice last year. Obviously beat them in the regular season, beat them in the state championship game. It's an important game for Parkview, I think. They have the loss to SDM where it really wasn't close. You come back the next week and beat an overmatched Heartland Lutheran team, it's the classic, the classic six-man shootout, 26-12. High scoring affair last week against Sterling. We've talked about this too. Parkview's just built a little different. They're not necessarily built to go win a 75-50 game like you see a lot of times. Pawnee City's more built that way. Pawnee City's more built to we can go score 60, we can go score 70 if we need to. So it comes down to can Parkview's defense, which they're going to lean on, and they have leaned on, can they slow down that Pawnee City offense and give their own offense a chance to kind of make this a grinder type game? And it's really, I know it's six-man football and it's the crowd for that's a little smaller, but this is really fascinating to me just to watch the way Parkview Christian's going about this, trying to do it with defense, ball control, power football, and not necessarily we're going to spread you out and just go one-on-one like you see so much in the six-man game. So yeah, a real interesting contrast in styles Friday night down in Pawnee City for sure.
Yeah, I've watched my fair share of six-man football, and I'd say 9 out of 10 games, one team has 60. Now, there's been plenty of games where the other team might have 6-12, but usually it's a blowout game. But a couple of big games this week. We'll be all over it. So keep close on thejournalstar.com. We'll have everything there for you. For Chris Basnett, I'm Colton Stone. We'll see you guys next week on the Prep Extra Podcast.